You're listening to 14th Source for all geeky and nerdy news and discussion, which means that you're listening to a podcast.
For all intents and purposes.
I am D. Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Asplund.
And we are your two overeducated, codependent nerd hosts, bringing the things that we like to talk about, but filtered through inquisitive and critical lenses. In the episode for Friday, August 18th, 2023. Oh my goodness, Andrew. Oh my goodness, Andrew.
What?
How does it feel to be turning 36 in 2 days?
Oh my gosh, it's so great. I know because it happened so many years ago.
And big plans? Wait, is that on the... That's not the weekend. That's a Monday. Is that correct?
It's a Sunday. It's
a
a Sunday. Sunday. Yeah.
Well, the Lord's Day indeed.
Yeah. Oh, boy. I'm going to get kicked out of work for that comment.
That's very true.
No, actually, I don't have a lot of big plans. I do... a small group of friends will be heading towards a lunch. We're going to have lunch.
Oh. Yeah. So my invitation just hasn't shown up yet? Is that what I'm hearing? Is that what's going? Small group.
I love the idea. I love the idea that if I invited you, you would show up. You would fly 2,000 miles for lunch.
Hey, am I paying?
Not for lunch, sir.
I feel like the best gift I can give you is that you gave me an incredible gift, Andrew, which is actually what brings us here today. There's been an instance
that's cancer.
Jesus.
Sorry.
It's no secret on the show that Andrew has influenced some of my media habits, and that we have used our own show to just talk about the things that we like to talk about. In fact, that's the premise of the show, but it's gotten much more singular and focused. And that's what we're going to be doing this week, dear listeners, talking about
how hot it is in Seattle.
Actually, no, because it's hotter here in Sacramento. But heat is relative. Discomfort is real. No, indeed, we're going to be talking about fiction. We're going to be talking about entertainment, something that Andrew introduced me to and that I'm just super hyped for. That's right, dear listeners. This week, Andrew and I are talking about Dredge, this incredible game about Lovecraftian fishing that can overcome any heat-induced discomfort.
It is. It's a classic.
It's an incredible game.
Yeah.
That's all I want to do.
Yep. And honestly, it's funny because I kind of thought, I think Dan might like this. I just don't know because I don't know how much he's going to be into the fishing part.
Well, I mean, the way the game is built, it's a good loop. It's not fishing as much as it's just like a resource gathering loop that isn't tedious and isn't abusive. The way I kind of felt, I'm not saying this is how it is, but the way I kind of felt coming to something like Subnautica, where I'm just like, this is just a game trying to kill me. And didn't have the patience for that game, whereas this game kind of balanced things in a way that didn't get me frustrated. And I will admit that my fuse is fairly short.
Right. And you've talked about that. You notoriously ain't have time for this.
Right. And but I definitely have time for Dredge. It is wonderful. But actually, that was a ruse. That's not what we're talking about this week. Although I'm sure we could.
Although, with the heat in my bedroom, we're almost done. So no.
Same with me, dude. It's especially because I live in a 2-story place, and my office is upstairs. It's just been collecting heat all day. This is not a pantsless episode, but you know what? We're getting close. But no, this week we're going to talk about, and it's been a couple weeks since, 1 week, I guess, since it ended, but season 2 of Star Trek Strange New Worlds.
Yes, so...
Not necessarily going too deep into plot.
Once again, we're here to talk about Star Trek.
Again, not going through episode by episode and going like, what happened? But more like just our reflections on it. Andrew as a veteran fan, me as a fairly new fan who's in the middle of absorbing classic Star Trek and watching new Star Trek as we go, coming at it from two slightly different positions, but arriving probably at the same conclusion, which is it's Star Trek Strange New Worlds continues to be awesome.
Yeah. No, that's so if you want the short version, that's it.
So if you have any thoughts about the topics we discussed...
Well, and I think for me, So Star Trek Strange New Worlds, actually, most of the modern Trek now is definitely much shorter and much more compact. I think we've talked about this before, right? The original series, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, barring a writer's strike, they were doing 20, 24 episodes a season.
Right.
Where now, like, all the shows are doing about, 10, right? I think Strange New Worlds is definitively at 10.
10, yeah.
I think, some other shows may do, like, 10 plus or minus 1. But
even Discovery?
Yeah, I know. Discovery's also, like, again, it may be 12, but it's still close enough.
Small. Right.
And
different sort of marketing models. Like the Star Trek, I think, gosh, the original series, like their seasons were even longer than 24, 26, I want to say.
No, it was about.
You sure?
Yeah, they may have done a 25.
Okay. But either way, that through Enterprise operating on an old sort of syndication model, even though the original Star Trek was dedicated to a specific channel, but it was still like that's how many episodes hour-long dramas are being funded for, right? 24 to 26 episodes.
Right.
Whereas in the streaming world, albeit a disaster right now due to the ongoing strikes, again, it's not a disaster because we disagree with strikes. It's a disaster because these companies are abusing the talent that they have.
Right. Really, the disaster is that the strike is still going on. Right?
Indeed. And but it's definitely changed things up. Streaming has changed things up in quite a fantastic way. For there's good and bad in everything here. But yeah, the shorter season model, I think is generally good because yes, and I would say Star Trek is even an exception to this, but like in a lot of hour-long dramas that are and sitcoms or half-hour shows, I should say, had long seasons as well. But looking back at old shows, there's always that fluff, right? You're like, well, they just needed to fill a week. And the benefit, I would say, generally speaking, is that these shorter seasons, you don't get fluff because it's all focused. You can only pick the best in an optimal situation, the best ideas and episodes to actually film and air.
And I think to a certain extent we see that with Star Trek, Strange New Worlds. I would also actually say that the thing that I... so I'm referring specifically to an interview with Jonathan Frakes that was done on the Will Wheaton show, whatever it's called, The Ready Room, where he talks about the idea that the way they basically seem to approach this show now is every episode is like a big theme. Like it's like a movie, right? It's a horror movie. It's a comedy. It's a whatever. And honestly, I feel that that Strange New Worlds is doing that. It's 10 episodes. Yeah, there's a little bit of narrative throughout, but it's mostly just like 10 standalone stories in very different genres, very different styles of story, right? I think this season is them pushing that to the limit, right? Because for those that don't know, right, we see just a straight up comedy, right? We see the Lower Decks crossover. We see a musical, right? We also see basically, a friend of mine said the China Beach episode, right? Just the war story, like it's just the war movie.
We also have the trial episode, right?
Right, and the lawyer episode, right? So yeah, they're just doing that, and to a certain extent, it captures what Star Trek used to do, but it's like someone saw that and said, like, let's do that, let's focus on that, let's turn the screws on. Yeah, we're gonna just do those big genre pieces, and make that the show.
It's interesting that you bring that up. Like each episode is kind of doing its own take on a theme, which I would actually say is kind of more classic television, right? That's kind of what Buffy was, especially in the early seasons, where I point to Buffy not because Joss Whedon is a good person, he's not, but he did kind of revolutionize, and with X-Files before it, but this idea of having a episodic television that also told a very kind of light, overarching story, right? Where just little things were peppered throughout, but generally each episode is about something. and isn't just like this isn't part 4 of a 10-part story. It does fall into that trap later on, as did X-Files. We saw Doctor Who do something like this, especially in the first couple seasons or series, of the rebooted show, 2005 and onward, where they do that delicate dance of like, what is this episode about? What story are we telling with this episode? But also, we see little glimpses of ongoing arcs, overarching stories that were introduced in the beginning of the season or last season and are addressed by the end of the season. And this is doing a really, like I said earlier, kind of delicate dance of balancing those two sort of, not disparate ideas, but those two different goals. And especially in such a short amount of time. I think the 10-episode format really lends itself to doing that well. And I think they do, especially considering how widely varied the different genres are, as you pointed to.
Right.
Now,
and I would say that, like, going back and watching both the original series, Next Generation, they certainly tried to do this, right? They had a few where, like, here's some episodes where we did something a little bit different. But again, when you're doing 20, 25 episodes, you also have a bunch of episodes that are just like, here's another one. You know?
Right. TNG and the original series, but definitely TNG, I would say, because I know that better than the original series. It's definitely much more of just the episodic television, mostly out of necessity for it being a syndicated show, right? Although, like you said, there are persistent story beats that last throughout, except for big ones like everybody forgot Data's head was buried for 200 years. But, right? Which would have been a great one to touch upon. And if you want to headcanon it, they do touch upon it in various serious ways, as Andrew pointed out to me as I was making my way through the show. But it's also interesting that the sort of episodic nature was part of the premise of Strange New Worlds. The question I wanted to ask you first was, at the end of season 2, do you feel that their sort of mission statement, the sort of the premise of the show has altered a bit, strengthened a bit, twisted, turned a bit? How has what Strange New Worlds is changed for you at all, or has anything sort of stood out to you more now that season 2 is done than what we saw with season 1?
To me, I think they're doing the thing that they said they wanted to do. And I forget, it's one of these special features. I try to watch a lot of them because I'm always interested to see what they say. And they basically describe the show as the original series, but what if at the end of the episode we don't just forget that, Kirk had to see the love of his life get killed? Or had to let the love of his life get killed. What if we don't forget that? And that's what the show is, right? Like, really, in general, it is, for example, season 2 really leans into this relationship between Nurse Chapel and Spock. And any one episode you can watch, and it doesn't, you know what you need to know, right? But as you watch it, there is the, like, okay, we see it developing, right? And it's not essential. It's not the show about how they fall in love or anything, right? But you can follow along and see some continuation from story to story that does, it makes sense, because in the original series, they would literally have these big impactful moments and then they'd forget about them, right? Or it wouldn't come up again, right? I mean, I think of the fact that in the original series early on, they have an episode where Spock, under the influence of the Psi 2000 virus, laments the fact that he basically loves Christine.
Right.
And then... Right? and then later, like, oh, he can't have emotions or he'll die. I actually think that's what something Dr. McCoy says at some point. Right. So I like that they found a way to do this episodic show but as you watch it, you do see some continuation, some narrative, some development throughout the story. So I think they're doing what they set out to do, and I think they're doing it well. I like what I see. It doesn't have the heft, like the heavy lifting of these serialized shows that are really popular now, right? You can just pick up an episode and feel pretty good about it.
Right. I think that's actually the biggest change for me, in that I think what really stood out to me this season was, especially kind of with some changes going on with Paramount right now and cancel, like, because Discovery has ended, canceled. I don't know what word you want to use for
their
it.
last season is their last season. The next one, rather, 5th, season 5.
So that's coming to an end. Prodigy getting canceled or whatever is happening.
Or whatever, right? A show that is not on Paramount Plus, but they're still advertising season 2 coming.
Which means like the veteran show of Paramount Plus is Lower Decks. And I think this season of Strange New Worlds is kind of acting in conjunction, literally in the case of the crossover episode, but as a whole, like acting as a mission statement for what Star Trek is now. And I think you hit it on the head, because from what I understand, Discovery is pretty serialized.
Yes.
It's they're telling a long story, or the season is a story, and the season is continuing the story that happened before, and so on and so forth. And this is going like, yeah, that and episodic goofiness and episodic focused storytelling, almost an anthology kind of a sci-fi anthology kind of approach to the show. I'm not going to go so far as to say take it back to the roots, but that is kind of what it's doing, but not in a regressive way. It's season 2 definitely felt like, look what we can do with Star Trek. It's not like any other show, right? And it's not even like our last flagship show. Like, we are doing something brand new, and it's a strong statement, I think, because of just the wide variety, disparate variety, of tone and theme and stories that they're telling this season in only 10 episodes to boot. It's, if you look at it on paper, if you haven't watched it yet and you're one of those people like, I'll just read the Wikipedia summaries of each episode, you're going to be going like, this show is insane. It doesn't make any sense, and it doesn't seem cohesive at all. But at its most absurd and at its most serious, I would say the show is cohesive and coherent, which in itself shows the level of writing ability that they have collected for this show. Because yes, the musical is goofy, but being Star Trek, being science fiction, they explain it, right? It's wonderfully done. The crossover episode with Lower Decks, sure, it's goofy, but they sci-fi their way through it and they Star Trek their way through it, I guess is a better way to put it. And it all makes sense within the context and the premise of this show. Mm-hmm. So it's never at a loss. It feels like these are all sort of, even though they're very different episodes from one another, they're all spoken out from the same central hub. And it's not just because we call it Star Trek Strange New Worlds, but because it all makes sense within those characters, the world, the story that they're telling. And I would say it's a marvel of television writing that they're doing with this show, especially with season 2.
When I think they have and actually I would say that this is probably true of a lot of the modern Trek. They have a very strong cast, right? Like, actually no, I think this is true of all the Star Treks right now, where, I mean, even Discovery, if nothing else, the cast is great. Right. I mean, I like the show, but like Strange New Worlds, the cast is great. Lower Decks, the cast is great. Picard, well, the cast is pretty good. I always joke that for me, Picard, the cast was great, other than that old guy. I mean, he was fine, right? But I think a lot. Like, I think they've really, with Strange New Worlds, they have this bunch of interesting people. They have a lot of characters with stories that some are new, some are old, but all of them are approachable for a new audience. But also, and I'm referencing a comment made, actually multiple comments I've seen now, made by Will Wheaton on the Will Wheaton Show, where he suggested like, oh, these new episodes give context to original episodes. Like, actually, I think I said that a while back, that that I think when we talked about the season 1, that the end of season 1, the whole discussion that they have at the end makes the 2-part episode, the menagerie of the original series, kind of interesting, because this idea that Pike basically admits he's willing to give his life to save Spock. And then we see in the original series, Spock is willing to throw his career away and give his life to help Pike. And that now, we had the episode after the musical, right, where Will Wheaton makes the comment that we now see the idea that Jim Kirk knows Lon Noonien Singh. And kind of like, while he's got some stuff going on, it's like, hey, you're all right. You're actually a person who's really doing good things and fighting to do better than the name that you bear. And the idea that gives context to the end of Space Seed, where Kirk, out of the blue, decides not to basically give Khan a second chance.
Right.
And you can look back and say, like, why would he do that? And now it's like, well, maybe because he looks at him and thinks of her. And it's like, wow, not only did you do a cool story now, but you've made a older story more like contextualized in a way that maybe wasn't intended, right? But now it's cool, right? It's like, oh, wow, that is neat that this kind of stuff. And I mean, I suspect a lot of it's planned, right? They know what they're doing. Like,
right. They're not, especially with the connections to the original series. Like, that's all intentional.
Right. I mean, it's clearly like that. Someone's put thought into it, and I think that's actually one of those things. What I also like about it, both with this show and even Lower Decks and Discovery and Picard, that the people writing it are also fans. Like, they care about it, so they want to make sure that this, feels good in the greater context. Now, are they loyal to canon? I mean, yeah, sure. They fudge around stuff because guess what? Canon kills.
Right. Yeah, it has been the case ever since they invented gunpowder.
Right, but just the idea that they've now been able to take the show and give these character stories that also give, make more things more interesting.
Right. I think the distinguishing piece here is, and I think I said this when we talked about season 1, is that they're fans, that the writers here and directors here are fans, but they're also good writers, and they're devoted to the show they're writing for. Speaking to your statement about canon, it's like, well, canon is great, but I care about this Pike, I care about this Spock, I care about this Uhura, and so on and so forth, right? And we got to make the story work for them. But because Star Trek is I guess it's kind of like what I was trying to say earlier in terms of its mission statement. I think if I were to boil it down, I feel like coming out of the season, the show is saying Star Trek is a medium, not a show, and we can do anything we want with it, right? And have it be good, and have it be contextualized and make sense within the world, the continuity of the show, and the fact that they can play with multiverse stuff, they can play with time travel stuff, they can play with genre stuff and have it all work, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's something that probably they've been realizing, since they brought Star Trek back, right? Since Discovery premiered, because I think Discovery started to toy with that. Lower Decks was like, absolutely, right? Like, we can do basically a sitcom, but also, but still do Star Trek, and still have a variety of what Star Trek is. And so, it is interesting to me. And actually, I will say that I think a lot about when they announced 6 months ago, a year ago, I forget when, that they're doing a new movie starring Michelle Yeoh, which, without saying too much because there's too much baggage for Dan to understand, that movie, like, everything about it is like, yikes, right? It would feel like this wouldn't feel like a Star Trek, except that now you're kind of like, well, but you could, right? Like, I think as a studio or as a production company, at least for me as a fan, they've demonstrated, yes, we can make this movie or this show that maybe is not what you expect, right? They can make a musical and it works. They can make this other thing and it works. They can make a horror or a comedy or a story about having sex with a candle, and it works, right? So I just had to throw that in there. You're welcome. But no, I do think that you're right. It's Star Trek is not. It's like it's a set piece. It's a genre. It's a whatever. I don't know. It's in everything.
Yeah. Sorry, just looking over the candle thing.
It's even a trashy daytime romance. You know,
we got deplatformed everywhere, Andrew. I don't know what happened this episode. I mean, it's interesting. You can almost see like a continuity of the current Star Trek regime kind of shaping or maybe realizing what they have in their hands here in terms of like I don't want to say a writer's room, but definitely sort of like who they have in control. Like Discovery was very much like, we can make a modern serialized dramatic TV show with Star Trek, where it's because that's what every show was, not every show, but that was what was popular, like telling serialized stories over the course of seasons. Like a season is a novel and every episode's a chapter. Then they're like, we can do self-referential humor, like a lot of sort of adult-oriented animated shows can be like. And now they're like, we can do let's make a show where we can do anything, but playing with their own continuity, playing with genre, and playing with tone. And it's interesting to and which we saw also happen, well, not, sort of playing with continuity, I guess, playing with nostalgia with Picard as well. Maybe in a more serious way. I don't know. I haven't seen it yet. But it's interesting seeing all these shows in context. And I feel bad for ignoring Prodigy and all this, but it's kind of its own thing. But like, if you line them up, there is kind of a... They kind of, if you line them up, they kind of act as like the ascent of man, kind of like not that Discovery is primordial, but like definitely you can see one leading to the next, leading to the next, and it's interesting to considering how many doors I feel season 2 of Strange New Worlds kicked open, and if they have the money and the ability and the reach to see what they do next with the franchise.
Yeah, well, and I will say that. Say what you will about Star Trek Picard, which you haven't seen, but Picard season 3 was another one where it's like, what if we just did 10 Star Trek movies, right? Because they all have a much more cinematic quality. Granted, it was a serialized story, and then we have Prodigy is a weird kids show, but that also can do the same things. Like it can do. Big stories. I mean, I will say there's an episode of Prodigy in the first 10 episodes that I still like. When I think about it, I'm like, wow, that episode was really good. And it's not something you'd expect from a show that is basically an on-ramp for children to like Star Trek.
Right. It's like, it's their version of a Saturday morning cartoon, right?
Right. So yeah.
Didn't you say Janeway is in that show?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Hollow Janeway.
Yes, and apparently season 2 is going to have even more people.
Maybe.
They've already revealed the first, 4 minutes. Again, this is weird when they're like, hey, we pulled this from our service, but here's the 4-minute exciting, not trailer. It's just, here's a 4-minute clip from the beginning of the episode that is here to get you excited. It's like, but to watch where, right? Anyway, no, I do think that Star Trek has definitely found a hot spot, and I do hope that they continue to do more. I know they have the new Starfleet Academy show,
right? That's, I thought
which will kind of be like a college whatever, like, and they could do that, right? Like you kind of believe.
Go ahead. Sorry. Is that? Do you know if that show's contemporary with Strange New Worlds?
I believe it's actually contemporary with Discovery.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And that's actually one of those ones where I think because of the context of because basically in Discovery season 4 or 3, 4, I think 3. The premise is that Starfleet Academy had been shut down for reasons that make sense in Discovery. So the idea that like this is like the first, we're bringing it back as Starfleet Academy.
Oh god, so this is going to be Star Trek undergrad?
Yeah.
Oh, it's going to be cool.
Right, and you
I'm
know,
down
like,
for Star Trek school.
Yeah, and honestly, like they've done episodes. Both TNG and Deep Space Nine have episodes about Starfleet Academy stuff.
Yeah, I remember.
And you remember one of them because you haven't seen the ones in Deep Space Nine. But
no, that's true.
But just the idea that like we know there's some stories there, and if you have an interesting cast, and I will say that like one of the writers they've announced for Starfleet Academy is Tawny Newsome.
Really? Wow.
Which then tells you, because, so for those that don't know, listeners, Tawny Newsome is Beckett Mariner, the voice of in Lower Decks, and actually the physical
one of the two main
actor
characters
as well. Yeah, one of the main characters of Lower Decks. So, and she's a comedian. So, like, you hired a comedian to help with the show. That means that you at least want some of it to be funny. Which, again, makes sense for basically Star Trek undergrad, So, yeah, who knows?
Not to steal your jokes, I do think season 3, since there is a strike going on, well, the actors are on strike too, so never mind. But once, hopefully, it all gets settled and they just want to get the show back on track, are they just going to do Star Trek Phase 2 for season 3?
Just recycle some Phase 2 episodes
again.
The
scripts are there, bro. Especially since they have, like you said, and we all know, well, maybe not all of us, and I guess we're not spoiling it for some reason, but they're definitely bringing a lot more of familiar faces onto the, or familiar names onto the bridge there, and I'm all for it.
Yeah, no, it's and it's a weird thing that they're going to have this whole cast of people that are Star Trek people. And then they get to the point where, and one thing I actually like about the Michelle Yeoh movie, I hope, and they said that they want to do more just movies, right? The idea that they could just do a one-off movie that is all these random people they've assembled, throughout these different shows, whatever it is, whoever they are, whoever they're playing. I mean, there's a joke at some point they could just literally do the original series cast, right?
Right.
And just have a movie. Like, here's a movie of, Star Trek, the original series, part 2, movie, or whatever they want. And that's the kind of stuff where I'm into it. This is the kind of thing that, like, yes, I will keep subscribing to your bullshit service or buying it, or actually at this point, I'm actually now starting to hard buy things because they've demonstrated they'll disappear them if they want.
Do you know if their original plan was to release the Star Trek Michelle Yeoh movie on the service or theatrically?
Yeah, I think it was on the service.
Yeah.
Although, who knows, right?
I like the idea that because of her well-earned and deserved success with Everything Everywhere All at Once, that they just changed the name of the movie to the Michelle Yeoh Star Trek movie, and not actually give it some, continuity, poetic kind of name. Which, you know what, that would work too.
I mean, I think it already has a name.
I know. Yeah. But like you've just been calling it the Michelle Yeoh Star Trek movie, and I'm like, I like it.
But yeah, and I know that because originally it was going to be a TV show. After I think it was like season 1 or 2 of Discovery, they're like, wow, Michelle Yeoh is great, and she's great. Let's do a show about her, even though the context of the show was a bit sus. And again, this is anyone that's listening that knows what the movie's about and what Michelle Yeoh's character, who she is in Discovery season 1 through 3, you know what I'm talking about. I just, again, because there's a lot of things Dan doesn't know, I'm not telling him. But yeah, people. That's why, like,
I'm sorry for ruining the podcast, everybody. I can take off my headphones.
It's fine. It's because you're going to hear it anyway. No, it's one of those things where I'm to the point where I could believe in what they're doing, and of course, yeah, Michelle Yeoh could do whatever she wants. Like, I believe it, and my understanding is she loves doing Star Trek. She's had a very positive experience. So yeah, it'll be weird to see where they go. It'll be, kind of interesting to see who they resuscitate, if anybody for the show. I say that just with the idea, not that they bring people back, but they do. Like, I mean, there are actors who have come back. I mean, obviously, Picard season 3 features basically the whole main TNG cast, and also featured quite a few other unexpected cameos. Lower Decks had a Deep Space Nine episode where we got the voice of Nana Visitor and Armin Shimmerman. So they can do these things. Actually, Lower Decks is basically the cavalcade of just like who wants to show up and record 20 minutes of audio. Like, yep. Right. So
that drops soon too, this September, right?
Yeah, September. So what they do with these things is they both bring old people back, cast new people, expand the world. I mean, I know people are already saying like, so are we gonna, now that they really like big name dropped Enterprise in season 2 of Strange New Worlds, people are like, oh, are we gonna see some of that? Like some of what? You gonna dig up Scott Bakula? You know, like, who knows? But who knows, right?
I mean, it won't happen for 3 years anyway because the strike is ruining everything. But
I mean, the if nothing else, just I'm going to say this. I apologize to everyone in support of Enterprise. If nothing else, I would love to see Enterprise actually get a finale that isn't just the Jonathan Frakes show. Because like even Jonathan Frakes basically says this was embarrassing. The idea that the last episode of Enterprise focuses on Troy and Riker. You're like you're sure. Like, wow, what? Right? So I think it'd be great if they could somehow find a way to not, I mean, you don't have to dig everything up, whatever. Just to let that show feel like, especially as these other shows and other characters are seeing, having moments, having closure. I mean, good God, Jerry Ryan, 7 of 9, is now suddenly went from being this weird character on Voyager that was there clearly for sex appeal, to now being a character that people are like, oh my God, she's had one of the greatest arcs in Star Trek history, and now they want to see her continue in a new show. I would love to see that kind of stuff for these things where like maybe it didn't feel like it got what it deserved, but in a way that's also engaging and interesting, right?
I like the idea that the Star Trek hive mind right now is creative, energized, pardon the pun, I guess, and is willing to take risks that they actually, I love the idea that Paramount announces the next theatrical Star Trek movie. They're going to invest like $100 million into this, $200 million. It's going to be a big budget blockbuster, but it's just the entire Enterprise cast finally get their movie.
Just going to sing the theme song together for 2 hours.
And then but they send off the show. It's like everyone's like, that entire show was worth it because this movie is so good. It'd be fantastic. And you know what? I would trust this Star Trek regime to do it and do it well.
Although I will say, I think the one thing this show, all the shows, not just Strange New Worlds, I talked about it, how they have a great cast. I do actually think that they also have a cast that, based on the interviews, so I'm assuming they're not full of shit, they seem to all get along well together.
Yeah.
Discovery, I've heard that. Jonathan Frakes actually said that he felt like Discovery felt like his experience on TNG. He's now seems to think that Strange New Worlds is great too. The Lower Decks people seem to all be, good pals. I think something that Enterprise maybe never had.
But we're even getting that sense from Lower Decks. I mean, the camaraderie is so strong. It
pierced the veil of animation, right?
Right.
No, I mean, imagine that. The idea that these voice actors, when they appeared together, I mean, you can see stuff where they appeared together at Star Trek events, but like when they did an episode together, they got along so well, right? That it was just it felt like these are just the people that play these parts. You're right. Yeah. The idea that they probably were recording most of their audio separately, when they were doing the animated show. And now suddenly it's like, yeah, these guys. But even they get along with each other, right? I think one of the things that I joke a lot about, again, going back to the Will Wheaton show, they talk about the crossover episode, Those Old Scientists, where Jack Quaid talks about how well he got along with Ethan Peck. Which, of course, I'm like, oh, I'm glad the Nepo babies really got along well. But
wait, what? Boimler's a Nepo baby as well?
Jack Quaid?
Oh, yes. Yeah, okay. wait, which Quaid is he the son of?
Well, you could save that for later. But yeah, no, but just like they get along with each other, right? They had good positive experiences. They liked working together. So just having all the like, and you know, who knows what they do. So I guess I'm saying that from the perspective of that the fact that actors like working together that's good. That says a lot about what you're making.
Right. Which again speaks to the quality of sort of the hive mind running this franchise right now. Like they're actually taking the time, putting in the effort to find the right people, not only to write and direct it, but to star in it. And that speaks to the quality of the show. And apparently the success of the show, because it's streaming, I'm not really sure. And because of how sort of sectioned off the internet is, I actually don't know how well. I know it's well regarded. I don't know how well Strange New Worlds is doing. I hope it's doing well. Mm-hmm. But that also is more tied up with how well Paramount Plus is doing. But I hope it's doing well.
And that's, who knows?
Mm-hmm. Didn't mean to bring it down. My bad. But yeah, it's a fantastic season. Anything about the season that we didn't touch on that you wanted to maybe bring up that didn't find a way into conversation?
No, I think it was great. I liked it all. And actually, again, going back to that earlier comment about how they find ways to make things from earlier episodes feel better or work better or make more sense. Or I would say, referring to the episode Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, finding a way to make the time travel-y stupidness of Star Trek feel like it works. You know, and I say this in the context of Star Trek, right? Because the show was in the 60s, they referred to things happening in the future, and it was the 90s, right? So like, oh, did you know that we had a wild eugenics war in 1992, right? And Star Trek has never really addressed that, or they just kind of like, the dates keep just whatever. They move, mm-hmm. you know. What I did like was they took a moment to say, well, no, like as it ends up, things change, you know, time travel, whatever, which Enterprise already talked about how there's
time
wars and stuff. And just the idea that like it moves, like the dates change, but the things are still happening just at different times. Which again, for me is like someone who's like, oh, I like that you found a way to make the fact that this is a show that's been in development on and off for more than 50 years. You found a way to make it feel like, oh, okay, yeah, it makes sense. I believe that, right? Like, sure, that's why things change as time goes on. Yeah.
And this is something you pointed out, but I definitely paid attention to it. And maybe it's a good one to go out on. I'm really glad that Paul Wesley actually finally got to play the main universe Captain Kirk, or James Kirk, I should say, not yet
right.
Captain. Because, yes, the funny thing is, like, up until that episode, he'd only played, like, alternate universe versions of Kirk. And I'm glad he actually got his foot in the door. They've accepted him. And nothing but good times going here forward.
Yeah.
So I guess the actual last thing I'll say is, Riker!
As we both clearly tried to straddle our chair to sit down.
So if you, dear listeners, have any thoughts about the topics we discussed this week, feel free to leave your thoughts as comments on the page for this episode at forallintents.net.
You can also post your comments or engage in conversations with other listeners on our Facebook page.
You can find us on other social media as well, specifically the places that Andrew and I frequent, which means you can find me on Instagram at dbethelcomics, and you can find Andrew on Mastodon at profounddark@dice.camp.
While you're at our website at forallintents.net, you can also take a look at our YouTube page, which you can find by clicking on the link in the corner that says YouTube. Or you may already be there listening to the show as it is simulcast in YouTube. If you do go to YouTube, if you do listen to us there, please feel free to like and subscribe, or as the kids like to say, ring that bell.
We use 2 tracks of music for our show. One is called Disco Medusae, the other is called District 4. And they're both written and performed by Kevin McLeod of the Clan McLeod, immortal swordsman, graph paper enthusiast, and musician extraordinaire.
You can find his music at incompetech.filmmusic.io, and that's all licensed under the Creative Commons 4.0 Attribution License.
If you like the show and like to help us out, the best way to do so would be to subscribe to the show using whichever podcasting service you happen to use. What would help us out even more, though, would be to leave some sort of review, whether a text review or using their proprietary metric help spread the word to new potential listeners through the magic of algorithms. I want to end the episode on a fun fact, Andrew.
What's the fun fact?
Fun fact, Star Trek fun fact. I bet you didn't know this. There was an episode this season of Strange New Worlds called Among the Lotus Eaters. Classic Star Trek premise, people, members of the crew losing their memory, and due to space radiation, all that fun stuff. That episode was directed by one Eduardo Sanchez. I did some cross-reference research to make sure it was the same Eduardo Sanchez. This Eduardo Sanchez, the director of this episode, is best known for co-writing and co-directing The Blair Witch Project.
Oh, okay.
So there you go. If you found that episode creepy and maybe nauseating,
well, I will say it's my favorite of his works.
There we go. It was a good season, though. I'm excited.
It was.
So until you're surprised by a director for a favorite television show, what? I'm D. Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Asplund.
And for all intents and purposes,
that was a podcast.
I said, oops, upside your head. Oops, upside your head.
But in about 30 minutes, we're ending this episode because I'm not going to be cool anymore.
Andrew, you'll always be cool.
Yeah, the one thing...
Are you doing talks right now?
Yeah, we are.
How's that going?
We're
sweating.
We just interrupted. It's good.
What are you talking about?
Star Trek.
What about Star Trek?
Strange
Super
New
bad.
Worlds.
Are we talking about how Uhura is the voice of a generation?
No,
and she sings a song of great beauty and stunningness?
Yes. Yeah.
Was that your butt or was that your face?
Yes.
Hey-o! Is that how you're going to be? Well, if you're going to be like that, I want to be like, you're listening to the 14th source for all geeking...
Mm-hmm. You're going to be like, what? Like what? Like what? Like that?
I was going to be like, your door is abierto right now.
Yeah, it is. That's the problem.